Okay, welcome everyone to C3 Inquiry and Active Classroom. The C3 framework is such an exemplary model of student-centered learning. I cannot wait to hear Carla's ideas on how to use it with Active Classroom. I have really been looking forward to this presentation. I love the whole process of C3 and how it goes through all the way to actually being civically minded and acting. So Carla is our presenter tonight, and she is currently teaching 7th grade world history at a middle school in Maryland. She is a nationally board certified teacher in literacy, and she has been since 2007. She's even taught 1st grade and 4th grade, as well as middle school social studies for the past 10 years. So she has a unique knowledge of many facets of this, so I'm really excited to hear from her. And thank you all so much for being here. If you have any questions or comments, I'll be monitoring the chat, so feel free to post there. We are going to have everybody muted just because of feedback, but feel free. We really want you to participate. There will be a short quiz at the end. Not quiz, I'm sorry.
Survey. Yes, we're not quizzing anybody.
It's the living room. Yes, there'll be a survey. Thank you for that quiz. We're not going to test you, but there'll be a survey at the end. If you feel free to please fill that out for us, we really appreciate it and look forward to your feedback. And I'm going to send this over to Carla. Carla?
Thanks, Melissa. I appreciate it. Good afternoon for some of you and good evening for some of you. My name is Carla Weinhold. I'm going to be leading tonight's webinar. As Melissa said, I am in the classroom. I teach 7th grade ancient history in Harford County, Maryland, about 20 miles north of Baltimore. I've been teaching for 20 years, about 10 of those years specifically in middle school in the area of social studies. But in my early part of my career, I taught 4th grade. And one of my struggles as an elementary teacher with a lot of us out there trying to fit everything in, there always seemed to be more hours of instruction needed than my students were physically in school. So I often ask myself, how can I squeeze in social studies content in this limited time that I have in my day? I wish when I was in elementary school teaching 4th grade, I actually knew more about the inquiry model, because this is an ideal, natural way to take my students' curiosity and blend it with the necessary content, and I can help prepare them for their life as a global citizen. As a middle school teacher, I find the inquiry model and C3 a natural lesson plan to help my kids connect with the world around them. As a teacher, I have to accept the fact that many of my students are coming into my classroom not lovers of history. It's like a dagger to my heart. But if I can help them learn how to think critically, begin to question their learning, questioning their experiences, questioning the information that they're getting, then I can help them facilitate their success as they continue to move forward throughout high school, into college, and then into the world. There we go. Oh, it seems to be a glitch with the computer, so I'm going to give me 1 second, bear with us. Give me 1 minute. Sorry about this, everybody. All right, now we go. Thank you for your patience. My goal for us this evening is to help you better understand what the C3 framework is, and then how you can use ActiveClassroom and the resources built in within ActiveClassroom to support this instructional support for your students. Just like Melissa said, if there's questions that come up, please use the chat feature. Melissa can chime in and we can address the questions as they come in. So the first thing I want to get some feedback from you is to what you already know about the inquiry process. So take a minute and share in the chat feature what you already know. So we know according to C3 that inquiry is, thank you, Donna, rooted in a teaching style. It's rooted in research, it's rooted in practice, and it's reflected in this inquiry arc. Inquiry is often a very ambiguous term to define. So we know that disciplinary knowledge and skills are integrated with it. We know that our students are active learners with inquiry. That's what we want. We want our students, thank you, Michelle, bringing in the idea of questioning. And we're going to talk about that tonight as well. We want our students to be the owners of their learning, guiding their path. We want teachers to be the facilitators rather than just the primary source of information. We want to give our students the opportunity to be political scientists, be economists, be geographers, be historians. So I'm wondering if when so it looks like the issue is when I go out. Sorry, everybody. So as we are teachers, we need to create authentic opportunities for our students to be able to identify problems, to be able to ask questions, and then be able to give them the time that they need to look at primary sources, secondary sources to investigate the question. And for a lot of our students, they need to learn the difference between opinions and then evidence-based claim. And we need them to be able to communicate what they learn. The last part is the one that's most often overlooked, is the ability to give our students the opportunity to communicate their learning or act upon the information that they have gained throughout the process. With pacing, with time constraints, we almost focus on getting our students the needed information and then forget that we need to build in that time for them to effectively communicate what they learned. So I want you to take a minute and read this image from socialstudies.org. As educators, we need to prepare our students to take an active role in our society. They need to be able to know how to look at information they're given and then be able to decipher what they need to know in order to be an effective member of society. There's a large group of people in our world today that are fearful that our democratic lifestyle that we've been living is actually endangered, that if our society does not continue to take an active and informed role in what's going on. Our society is evolving at a much faster pace than previous generations. So no matter where you stand on the political spectrum, I think all of us, for our students, have the same end goal. We want our students to be knowledgeable thinkers and active citizens. So these are some reasons as to why we need C3 in our classroom. If you're not familiar with the marginalization of social studies, this is looking at the loss of instructional time at the elementary level and then the narrowing of instruction at the secondary level in response to just looking at multiple choice, high stakes testing. And both of these things have impacted what time and resources and what support is available for social studies. So this is actually a report from the Council of Chief State School Officers. So if we look at the statistic down in the center, that 23% of American 8th graders are proficient in civics. If we fast forward 10 years, these are our 20-somethings that are making decisions in society. So the introduction of Common Core provided an opportunity for social studies educators to be able to reframe their instruction and be able to promote the idea of disciplinary literacy in social studies in a way that it's allowing us to be able to regain a more balanced and elevated role in the K-12 curriculum. So if we look at the motivation of our students, when students come into the classroom, they are naturally curious about the world that they live in. However, they become disengaged when instruction is limited to sitting down, reading a textbook, answering the end of chapter questions, taking multiple choice tests, being able to read this worksheet, complete this activity, when we're just focusing on measuring content knowledge, where we're not taking a lot of time to be able to measure how knowledge is meaningful and how what they're learning is applicable to the real world that they live in. C3 addresses this issue in a lot of fundamental ways. If we look at the future of our democracy, abundant amount of research bears the reality that fewer and fewer young people, particularly students of color, students in poverty, are actually receiving a high quality social studies education. Despite the central role of social studies in preparing students for being citizens in the world that they live in, active and responsible citizens are able to identify and analyze public problems. They're able to deliberate and have a conversation with other people about how to define and address the issues. They can take constructive action when they work with others. They can reflect on their actions and create and sustain groups that influence both things on a large and a small scale. So if you look at society, they vote, they are going to serve on juries, they follow the news and current events, they participate voluntarily in groups. So implementing this C3 framework will help our students to be able to act in these ways, to act as citizens and embrace and enhance their preparation for life in college and careers. So I want you to take a minute, because I know a lot of us are currently using ActiveClassroom, and I want you to share what one of the features that you currently love and use in ActiveClassroom. The current events lessons, thank you, Greg. I know some people enjoy the zombie lessons, if they have anything to do with geography, Atlas activities, analyzing photos. So I want to take a minute and share with you the ways you can find. Becky, hopefully I can convince you to explore ActiveClassroom a little bit more. Kim, thank you for primary sources. So if you have the access to ActiveClassroom, this is in the activity search area. So if you start with your topic, if we decide we want to do something on the Black Death, because I know that's something that's coming up in my classroom. If you click on the Advanced tab and then you choose your series title, there actually is a whole series of lessons already created for you on C3. And Becky, I did see your topic, and hopefully we'll be able to get somebody to be able to help you get some access and be able to look at the resources. So this is a search that I did with my ActiveClassroom. So I chose world history, C3 inquiry, and these are just a few of the sources that came up. I think there were actually 2 pages of information. But for where I was looking instructionally with my students, because this is actually a lesson I did with my students, I focused on the one with Gothic cathedrals because we happen to be in our Middle Ages unit. So I'm going to actually be showing you images, video clips from my lessons with my students so you can see the C3 framework actually in action with my students. So where is this resource again? This is if you go into the activity search, and If you go, so let me go back a slide for you. If you click on the advanced feature that's at the top right, then there's a series title, and if you go, it's the third box down. If you go down to C3, then you pick the C3. I also narrowed by the subject because I teach world history and I wanted to look at those features as well. So we'll be looking at the 4 dimensions that were used in in C3 with my Active Classroom. Dimension 1, looking at questioning and planning for the inquiry. Dimension 2, applying disciplinary concepts. Dimension 3, evaluating the sources. And then Dimension 4, communicating conclusions and taking action. So the first dimension is looking at questions and planning inquiry. So I want you to think about what comes to mind when you think of questioning. So go ahead and share some of those responses in that chat feature. So while some of you are gathering, I wanted to point out that quote that's on the left-hand side of the screen. So if we want our students to question, if we look at it from the ability to organize your thinking around what you don't know. So a lot of us know about Bloom's taxonomy, and we use that with our students. Disciplinary questioning, thank you, Kim. Right there, questions, open-ended questions. Thank you, Donna. So listed here are several different questioning strategies that can be used. I adapted a lot of these from Mind Tools. I like to use the idea of open and closed questioning with my students. I don't use the words convergent and divergent. I think the vocabulary is great. I just want my students to focus on, is it open-ended? Is it closed right there? A lot of times I'll have my students brainstorm their questions and then go back and label, are they open or closed? And then if they feel they have too many closed, which is most often the case, then they can go back and add more open or divergent questions. I like to use the leading questions or probing questions, especially when I want my students to expand an idea or dig into an idea deeper. I also like to give my students the opportunity to hear the questions of others, especially for my struggling learners. Hearing what other people are wondering helps them spark their ideas. I also give my students, it's a little bit larger than a bookmark, but a bookmark that gives them question stems so they can access that whenever they need it to kind of get their ideas and help formulate those questions. I use an interactive notebook with my students, so I have them tape it into the front of their notebook. This is a smaller version of that I use with my students. So it helps them be able to kind of structure that question a certain way. This can be modified to meet the needs of your students. You can make it thinner if you want. It has a lot of use and versatility with your students. So for my lesson, I had my students start reading the background essay. A lot of my students didn't have a lot of background knowledge on what a cathedral was. So I wanted them to learn a little bit more about cathedrals, learn about the role of the church, even though that was part of our overarching objective. For this activity, I grouped my students into 8 groups of 4. I really wanted them in smaller groups to be able to look at the questions and have conversations. You'll see in another slide I made bins. You can see it on the floor in the picture. I actually teach in a computer lab, so my students actually do a lot of group work on the floor. And what's nice is Active Classroom gives you the versatility to have resources be digital or paper-based, and you'll see some of my students chose digital. Some of them still like that paper in their hand. So they were able to use their phones, the devices they had access to be able to use the information. So once they finished reading, I had my students get into their bins and grab a piece of chart paper and a marker. So this first video clip I'm going to share for you is one of my groups of students. And you'll notice in this first video clip, everybody was talking and she was kind of doing the writing. In the second video clip, you'll see that this group worked a little bit differently. And in that first part, you can see that that student was going back to the article, which is something going back to our sources, being able to talk about the source, talk about back up our positions. That's something that we worked on for a good bit of the year. So in this third video clip, this group did more of a discussion before they wrote down. And you can see that the groups wanted to verify with each other. Some groups took more of a brain dump, everybody writing things down. And then here's one more. I know the video quality when you have class sizes of 30 trying to get focused on, so I appreciate your patience.
Now, Carla, we did not hear the sound in that. Was
You
there
didn't hear,
volume?
there was, so we weren't hearing
Okay,
any.
that's what.
All right, so I
No.
apologize. Let's go backwards. Let me try it this way. Let me check the, so it's saying people can hear me. All right, so we'll keep going. I apologize. What you saw in this first one is one student, you saw him lay down. He was kind of being the scribe. They were having discussions in the second one before they were writing down. And then in this third video clip, they were again having discussions, and then it panned over to another group who was they were questioning each other on how to formulate the question before they were able to write that question down. So what you can see on this next slide is some of the end products of their questioning stage. So this first image, Civics A, actually took a more, like listed their questions, whereas geography, you can see different handwriting, different people, because as they came up with that question, they wrote that down. We have the one at the left-hand side. They focused it on what am I wondering about? What do I want to know more about? So then if you look at the top right, they even labeled their questions wondering what I want to know. So the second stage of the lesson was where the students began to focus on the 4 content areas. And C3 focuses on geography, history, economics, and civics. So in order to help look at those 4 areas, I decided to use more of a modified jigsaw approach with my students. So the bins that you see here were organized with the resources that each particular group needed. So there was an economics folder, and whatever sources the economics group needed to analyze were in that folder. So I use this just to keep everything organized. The students also had electronic access to all 10 sources through the ActiveClassroom account. So while they had the paper sources, they could also use the electronic source if they wanted, especially with the colored pictures. So I chose, while I was doing Dimension 2, to kind of blend in Dimension 3, which was having the students evaluate the sources and evaluate the evidence. So having them look critically at the sources they're examining. This is a skill that a lot of our students need if we think about the world of fake news and social media. So this skill of being able to look critically at the information that they're giving is going to be something they need to carry with them forever. So looking at, okay, what is the author's purpose? Why are they giving me this information? Why, when I'm looking at the source, is it just for information? Is it to give me a position on something? What's the audience? How is this relevant to, for this particular lesson, how is it relevant to looking at Gothic cathedrals and looking at the role of the church in the Middle Ages? Being able to look, is there a bias? This is something that we look at a lot in history. Is it only showing one side? There were sources about Romanesque cathedrals versus Gothic cathedrals, and the students looking at, why are we looking at both sides of these different styles? And then, how old is the source? Was it from the time period we're looking at? Is it more of a primary source? Is it relevant for the time period? How does it connect to our topic? So lots of things that we as adults naturally do. We need to take the time to teach our students how to look at these sources. So this is a graphic organizer that I used with my students because I wanted them to look at the 4 particular sources. I wanted them to summarize it, to use it for when we were communicating the results. But then I also wanted them to start noting down specific things about the role of the church, because I wanted them to be able to come back with that. And I didn't want their notes in all sorts of different places. So these are some pictures of my students examining their sources. These 4 pictures all look at the students who chose to look at the paper versions of the resources. And you'll see they have some laying down, some chose to work at desks, some chose to use clipboards. The student in the middle is actually using a chair to write down. And then they also had the electronic. We've got the 2 students on the right-hand side that were looking at their phones because they wanted to be able to zoom in on pieces of the images. Some of the other students just used the sources that were on their actual desktop that they logged in through ActiveClassroom. But they all were able to then analyze their sources at their own pace and time. So the 4th stage actually happened on day 2 of the lesson. So this was a 2-day lesson. This is often the most difficult stage for teachers. Taking an informed action doesn't always fit in our scope and sequence. However, if we look at this stage, this is the time for our students to shine. This is the time for our students to share what they've learned. There are numerous ways for students to be able to share information. They could make posters. For my particular lesson, I had to give 2 options because in every classroom we know that there are things that come up. It happened to be one of our PE field trip days. So my students did all of the prep work in day 1 of the lesson, but then was not going to be there for the actual discussion that we were having. So one option was for my students who were there, they were going to participate in a fishbowl discussion. So for each group, for the first fishbowl round, pick 2 people to enter the fishbowl, while others stood outside and observed the fishbowl and they took notes. Each fishbowl lasted about 8 to 10 minutes. The students who weren't able to participate wrote more of a paragraph describing the impact that their topic had, so they still had a way to communicate. The one thing I like with Dimension 4 is this is where teachers get to be creative. We can access multiple intelligences. We can give students access to their learning style. So we're going to try the sound one more time. I want to share with you actually one of the fishbowl discussions that we have. Melissa, if you can.
So for history, my first source, it said that Romanesque style churches had like their structures were really built very grand and famous for like massive exteriors, but then they had dark and soft interiors.
Are we getting sound?
Sorry,
Are
I
we
was trying
getting
to send
sound?
it. Yes, the sound worked. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I thought
The sound worked. The sound worked. Awesome. Thank you.
So we are getting sound.
Sometimes form a very happy part of life, but the church holds funerals, it explains death, and there's multiple roles to the church.
I'm not sure if everyone is having this problem, but the sound is sort of in and out, and now it has stopped completely, at least on my end.
Okay,
So
can you hear
I
me?
was excited. It was working.
Melissa, can you
I'm
hear
sorry.
me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear
Okay.
you. Yes.
I apologize that the sound's not working. Um, so this is the reflection document that the students completed while they were watching the fishbowl. So they had to look for information they learned about historical impact, civics, economics, geography, and then connecting to another activity that we've done, the role of the cathedrals and the church in daily life and education. So throughout this lesson, they had multiple opportunities to be able to communicate what they learned. And then this is the alternate assignment that my students did for the ones who were missing the fishbowl discussion, and they were very, very sad that they were missing that. A lot of my students came in after day one. It happened to be the day after the burning of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. So a lot of my students were like, wait, I know what a cathedral is because it just caught fire in France. So they wanted to learn. They thought this was the only cathedral in the world. And I said, no, there are lots of cathedrals. So a lot of my students wanted to go beyond what we were learning and learn a little bit more about cathedrals. So this was an extension opportunity that I presented with them. I let them pick one of the 5 major countries in Europe. I had them locate 5 to 6 cathedrals in that country and some interesting facts or details about that cathedral. And they're in the process of creating like an informative travel brochure or poster about the cathedrals. And then we're going to do a gallery walk. So timing wise, I just didn't get to show these pieces because they're still in the process. But I want to leave you with the idea of what kind of atmosphere are we building for our students? As a social studies teacher, I strongly believe that our focus needs to be preparing our students to be functioning members of society. And I think as any teacher, that's what we want our students. We want them, whether they pick a career path, the college path, we want them to be a functioning member of society. Regardless of the content we teach, the grade we teach, we all need to work together to provide our students with the knowledge as well as the skills that they need in life. Are we teaching our students how to have a meaningful discussion? Can they have a discussion where they can respectfully disagree with someone? And I think the most important with the news going on today, can they look at information with a critical eye? Can they support information to support their position or their point of view? And then can they take action? When they see an issue going on, can they promote that issue? Can they help make a change? So that's what I look at C3 and all of the active classroom resources that they have available to help us making these informed decisions. So if we look at this quote, the art of teaching is the art of assisting discovery. Again, having us as teachers being the facilitator, not necessarily the prime source of information. So are there any questions? I apologize for some of the sound issues. Melissa, any questions that came up that I didn't answer?
I don't think so. We had some questions on accessing Active Classroom. So if you go to www.activeclassroom.com, there is a trial. It does take a couple days. However, I am going to, in order to get a login, I'm going to send an email for them to be on the lookout for you guys. If you do need a trial and want to try it out, that's awesome. And we did have another question about finding the C3 framework. Let me go back up to that. Michelle Anderson asked, where is the resource again on the C3 framework?
So which resource, Michelle, were you? Because some of the resources I've created, but then are you talking about the actual C3 lesson plan? I don't know if Melissa muted us. The first slide, I'm going to go back and make sure I have, so I apologize those who are looking through. Come. Oh.
In general, we all tend to have the same questions.
Yes.
So you're probably helping
Is
others
it this
also.
one, Melissa? Yes. Okay. So when you click on, when you go into Active Classroom, and actually, let me, since I have my screen up, so let me just open up another window just so you can see it. So when you go here, Melissa, if you click on Activities, and then, I don't like to hear when things expire. I'm sorry, Melissa. What's another, you can download some of the resources if it hasn't already expired yet. And if you go here to the series title, here's that C3. So if you're going to narrow by subject, let's say US history, you have to kind of start with the top layer and then add, and then all you hit this search feature, and there's numerous resources. So this is just US history, 2 pages. So there's 40 different C3 lessons that you can use with your students. So Melissa, look out for, maybe we can see that. I know that some districts have it. Hopefully you can talk to your social supervisor. I know we have a lot of salespeople in different areas that can help with this stuff as well. So hopefully tonight you have a better understanding of some of the resources that C3 has, maybe reacquainting yourself with the inquiry arc, the C3 lesson format, so that you can use some of the materials and resources that you can have. What's nice is Active Classroom has all the primary sources or secondary sources in one area. So using the chat feature, and I borrowed this from another Active Classroom presenter, Montre, and this was an amazing strategy. So thinking about how has your thinking been changed? How has it been confirmed? And then my number one, being a teacher, is I want something that you can take back and use with your students.
Okay, and there was a question about whether the webinar was recorded. Yes, it was recorded and it will be available on socialstudies.com. So in a few days.
So Michelle, that same place where you clicked on activities, there's a professional learning and there's like a webinar tab, and you can go back any webinar that's been recorded for Active Classroom. You can go back and look at, even ones you didn't register when they were live, you can go back and re-listen to.
Yes, and what a great recommendation, Robert. Thank you so much. Free
Yes, the
resources.
Stanford history, yes.
Yes,
And there are lots of resources available for teachers.
yes. So I believe even if your subscription has expired, you could still sign up for a free trial to access some of those resources also. Are the resources on Stanford Elementary too? I believe so. I believe they could be utilized in a lot of different areas. I'm
Right.
not exactly sure if it has it listed like that, but there's definitely resources that I feel that definitely could be used in a third grade classroom. I taught third grade for about 6 years, so definitely applicable, and we use them. And Michelle Anderson, shoot, so she tried to sign up for a free trial and it did not let you. You may try using a different email. I'm hoping you have access to those resources, and I will also add your name in that it has expired, and maybe our salesperson can get in touch with your system and hopefully get that back for you, because such a great resource.
Yes.
And fabulous for student-led, for all of the things that you are talking about, not just C3, but so many ways to utilize and to encourage inquiry and student-led classroom discussions. I just can't say enough about it. There are active classroom resources for elementary. There's just not near as many. You're not going to find as many third grade lessons.
But I think, Melissa, if they use that same structure, but maybe use more picture-based, that might help you as
Right.
well.
Great idea, yes. I'm thinking activity-wise, but yes, absolutely. And you could even take parts. So if each student did a part of a lesson, that would sort of make it much more applicable for your age group also. Or maybe make it so it could be completed in the time that you would have for your social studies. But Carla, thank you so much. Fabulous. I completely agree with you. I love that last question. Are we developing responsible citizens? Fabulous. That is a question we need to be asking ourselves. And in my current position, I ask myself that daily, because I think we're starting their journey. And so I really appreciated that also, in addition to all the fabulous ideas. I love the fishbowl. I mean, I was just impressed. I wish we could have seen those videos and heard the videos.
I
But
know.
I appreciate you talking us through it. And once again, I apologize to everybody. Yes, they absolutely have modified reading levels. I know Carla can tell you more about that. Also, they even have 16 different languages. So
Yes.
not only do you have several reading levels, we've also got it in other languages, and it can be read to the students. So,
Right. Which is
I
nice
mean,
for a lot of our students, for them to be able to have it, somebody else reading. There's a lot of features where they can highlight the words or interact with the words to be able to define them for them. It is very user-friendly for the students of all levels. And a lot of when you're in that activities, when we were doing that search, it shows you the Lexile level, so you can kind of gear yourself and focus on ones that you know are going to be a readability appropriate level for your students.
Exactly. Fabulous. Thank you all so much for participating. And of course, we are here for any other questions that you have, but we appreciate everything. And thank you again for staying with us and learning some more about C3 and how it relates in Active Classroom. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.